LinkedIn presents.
This is the Forbes Books Podcast, where we inspire you to achieve your dreams by sharing the stories of successful leaders and visionaries. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and this week I'm joined by two extraordinary artists who have made it their life's work to empower and inspire creative entrepreneurs around the world. Ekaterina Popova and Alicia Puig are both accomplished artists and businesswomen in their own right, but it's their joint effort that captured my attention. They're the co-authors of the Creative Business Handbook, a roadmap for artists who want to turn their passion into a successful career. Kat, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. And Alicia, welcome as well.
Thank you so much, Joe. We're really excited to be here, and I can't wait to share all about our book.
Yeah, and I'm super excited because it's one of the things I'm super passionate about, and it's creativity. And I feel like as we get older as adults, we almost have that creativity gene beaten out of us. We're so busy surviving, trying to have fun, meet friends, have a job, pay for food, that we forget about creativity. So, Kat, talk to me about creativity and how that fuels you from like the start of your life to what you're doing now with the book.
Yes, I love this question. Thank you so much. So, creativity was something that really kind of held me together like glue. I'm an immigrant, and when I moved here in 2001, I was 12, and art was pretty much the only way I could communicate for a while. So, I would doodle and sketch, and eventually, in art classes in high school, I really found my way and I found something that I really enjoyed. But as an adult, I see how creativity fuels business, fuels, marketing and branding and all parts of our life. So I'm super passionate about it, not just as an artist, but just being in the business world. It's such an incredible thing. So I hope everyone really takes the time to foster their own creativity.
Cool. And Alicia, about that, the idea of the intersection of creativity and business. To some creative types, they may be like, oh, how gauche. Creativity has nothing to do with business. Oh, please. This is two different things. But in reality, we all know, as stealing Kat's line there, I'm steal that going forward too, Kat, is creativity fuels business. So talk to us about that intersection of business and creativity.
Ooh, I love that you're bringing this up because this goes back to when we were in art school. So we did have a business of art course. We took it in our senior year. So you take it at the very end,
Wow.
and by the time that you are taking this course, you should already be applying to grad schools if that's what you want to do, if that's the path you want to go for. You should already be applying to galleries, if that's the path that you want to go towards. So taking it then is too late already. So from the beginning, from art school, you're already put at a disadvantage. And so that's something from the very beginning that we learned. It creates this gap. So unfortunately, a lot of artists from school have this notion ingrained that art and business don't really mix. It's like thrown in at the end. And so for us, we then had to spend the next 10 years teaching ourselves about how to bring them back together. And that's exactly what we did. Now, we will be fully transparent, and we share this in the book. It was not an easy road. It was a very rocky road, and we had to learn and figure things out along the way, but we did. And so that's exactly why it's become a passion of ours to share exactly these lessons that we've learned, that you should feel comfortable and should go after combining the two, because they do work hand in hand so well.
And it's so funny to say that, Alicia, about the transition from art school to the real world, because I've spoken to artists before, and there are some that are still like clinging to that starving artist mentality that they have to starve for their work. And it's sad because there's no reason that, because there's this whole adage, you guys, all art is fueled from the worst parts of your life. But you know what? There's some happy people that have made some great things. I think there's some people that, despair has brought them creativity and such. But in general, in this world, if as long as you're healthy, happy, have a good environment around you, you can create. So, Kat, talk to me about the struggles that Alicia was alluding to in terms of bridging the gap of business and creation. What were some of those struggles that you both experienced and you talk about in the book?
So many struggles, so many. The biggest one I think was this. I felt really torn. One part of me really wanted success, and I really, as an immigrant, I wanted that American dream. I wanted a comfortable life. And on the other hand, your professors were telling you that it's not cool to make money. You're a sellout if you try to make money, and you should just either get a job as a professor, get tenure, or work for a museum, or you magically become famous and get represented by a gallery, thus giving away all your control and all your power. So there's definitely ways around that. But for me, I felt very, very torn, and I couldn't find my way until I really stopped the people pleasing. I had to
Mm,
really decide I'm not going to listen to all these people because I truly don't want their life. It's that quote we see
mhm,
all the time: don't take advice from people you don't want to be like.
mm,
And in a way, I was doing that just because I didn't have any other examples. And so the journey has really been embracing both sides, looking for examples. One artist that really was a leader for me was Ashley Longshore, who took charge of her art career. And, for those not familiar, she is in New Orleans, and she became her own gallerist. And just seeing some people pop up in the art world that are doing things differently, being innovative, approaching their business in a different way, started to help me see that there's potential beyond this either starvation or becoming a sellout, and
mhm,
seeing that there could be a successful, quality, professional way of doing things that isn't gonna make me look weird to the art world.
mhm.
Like, there really is a space where both can exist.
And to pull a thread on what you mentioned, Alicia, she was talking about an artist who went out and did it herself, didn't need the gallery model. But in a way, the internet has democratized art where you can sell your wares, whether it's direct to consumer or via something like an Etsy or one of the multitude of websites that you could deal with. How has the art world, I guess, convalesced with that? How have they felt like, okay, this is acceptable to sell art online and be an artist that you can be commercial at the same time as being artistic? How is that blend going on now?
This is a great question. So it was a very, very slow transition. And yes, we are still young, but we were in the midst of that happening. So
Mm,
we grew up in the industry as that was happening.
mm,
At the beginning, people were very, very slow to adopt online sales. And I have to say that it really wasn't until the pandemic, when they were forced to do that you
mm,
saw a lot of galleries and auction houses and the rest finally make that shift. Now, yes, I will admit they had websites. They usually weren't that great, but they didn't often have a strong e-commerce presence until that was their only option.
mm,
And so I'll give us a little pat on the back because we started PXP Contemporary in 2019. So that then gave us a full year to have the online presence established, to work out the kinks, to
mhm,
figure it out. And then when 2020 rolled in and surprised us all,
yeah.
we were ready for it, basically. But it's been an interesting transition, and I think the biggest thing that I've noticed and mentioned is that it was slow and very, very slow to happen. But since then, obviously people have had to embrace it, so it's been a huge uptick. Now you see a ton of online platforms, you see a ton of institutions, galleries, working towards having a stronger e-commerce presence. But what you're talking about is also the power given to artists, and really there's no better time than now to be an independent artist. You do not need a gallery, you don't need a middleman. You can be your own gallerist, as Kat alluded to, with artists like Ashley Longshore, Heather Day, all these big, CJ Henry. That's another great, great example. She is one of the first artists who became huge on Instagram,
Mm,
and she doesn't really work with galleries at all. She does this amazing thing where she will put together her own solo exhibitions. She actually has one up right now in New York, I believe. And they are these huge productions. I mean, in warehouses, and they're all built around a theme. You really have to check out her work. We
wow.
actually had her on our podcast recently, and her interview was incredible, because she really plays by her own rules. But those are the kind of stories that we love to see because, like I said, really now is the best time to be in the arts, to be a creative person, because you have complete control, or you can if you want to, which we
Yeah.
hope you do.
And I love that. And it's funny because I've spoken to other artists that have real day jobs. Like they have a 9 to 5 job, they'll work in a marketing thing. And the artist I'm speaking about, struggled with that. It's like, how do I balance these two things? Like, how can I be creative when I'm off the clock or vice versa? How do artists nowadays who balance that? It could be you two as well, in terms of during the day, you're grinding, you're just making sure you get paid, you can have a nice place to live, you eat, blah, blah, blah. But then at night, maybe you moonlight. It's like a superhero. By day, you're an office drone. At night, you're an artist. So, Kat, how, is that something that you deal with, or people in your community? How do they balance that?
Definitely. This is a really important topic because when I was working a day job, obviously I had to transition to self-employment over time. I had to do that. I had to dedicate either time in the morning before my shift or the weekends, and I had to be really disciplined, and it was quite challenging. And are ways to make it work. I think the important thing is to not compare yourself to people who are way further ahead or have other financial advantages, or their situation could be totally different. So just doing the best with the time you have and being really disciplined with it. And my rule was I just had to make something, whether it was 30 minutes or an hour, it didn't matter. Every day I really showed up for my craft. And then I would time block one day a week where I would work on like grant applications, exhibition proposals, promoting my sales and things like that. And for those who are self-employed, it's similar because as an artist, you want to be in the flow. You don't want distractions. You don't want to be on Instagram or email all day. So you really do have to carve out time to focus on those admin business tasks and then still be the artist that you want to be. But it's definitely easier said than done because, as you know, the phone is a very distracting device and it can be very, very hard to focus. But we're all capable of turning it off and muting it when needed.
The other part of this that we are big advocates for is normalizing that that's okay. Because as Kat mentioned before, we kind of grew up in this industry where you either had to be one or the other. If you had a day job, you weren't a real artist, or if you had a business, you weren't a real artist. And so we've had to break down these stereotypes for a lot of people in our community and say, it's okay. If you have a day job and you like that day, that's the other thing too. Not every day job is a grind. We have a bunch of artists who they keep their day job because they actually enjoy it. Yeah. And so if you're at a job that you enjoy and it helps pay the rent and it helps release the pressure from the artwork, from the creativity, that's amazing. That's wonderful. So it's something that we harp on a lot, and I feel like a broken record saying it, but because it doesn't have to be this either or situation. You can have both.
I love that. All right. Before we get into the book, I got to ask you both a question about something, and you may have an opinion on this or not, but NFTs. I know the art world has sort of Alicia made a little face there. I know the art world has embraced NFTs. I mean, you're seeing not as often anymore, but you're always seeing record-breaking deals of NFTs. So can I get your opinion? Like, what's it all about? Because I don't want to be like a Gen Xer shouting at the clouds about this isn't real art. It's a JPEG that you own, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to go there, but I just want to get a take from folks in the industry, in that world. Is this something that's real? Is it tangible? Does it have legs, as they say? Kat, you first.
This question is very complicated. However, I will say I will be fully transparent that I made a decision last year to be completely neutral about it. So I did my education. I read the articles. One of our dear friends, Tam Grin, she wrote an amazing book if anyone's interested in checking it out. It's for artists to figure out how to sell your NFTs, and it's on Amazon, and I'll send you a link. But for me personally, I think it's a tool, and if it works for some people, that's awesome. I could not figure out a way to make it work for my art just because I'm more of a traditional painter. But I know some artists who found creative ways to amplify their practice and their business with it. So just like anything, just like, this controversy with AI now, I think there is a place and time for it. And if you can use it in an ethical, responsible way that brings value to people and other people recognize the value, I think that's fair. But I personally will say I do not use NFTs in my life or business at all. But I admire people who have had success with it. And we had some artists who did great things.
Cool. Alicia, how many NFTs you got in that NFT wallet of yours?
None at the moment, goose egg. But that's not to say I'm against it. I will say, similar to Kat, I think my stances on it has always been like 50-50. It could really go either way. I think the better question is, come back to me in like 5 years, because there are some things that are just trendy in the art world, but you have to think about longevity. And I'm not saying that this won't have it, but there was definitely a bubble, and that has already burst in, only 2 years of this really being popular. So, again, come back to me. The art world is such a long thing. You know,
Mm.
it's you have to play the long game. There
Yeah.
is really not there are not many things in it where you can get rich quick, and I think that's a misconception. I mean, you do hear, of course, about some emerging artists that they'll get put up on auction, and yes, their prices will jump up to an exorbitant amount, but that's very, very rare. A lot of the art world is a long game. So again, I think it's more about like what Kat said, there are people that are really trying to make this work. And so I'm interested to see what they do with it and how they can make it work to also serve that end of democratizing the art world, because the point of them is really giving the power back to artists and putting money back in their pockets rather than the middlemen. But there are some kinks that need to be worked out. There are some things that really need to be ironed out before it can be what I think the people who started and want it to be like. There's a gap there that's
Yeah.
still not quite settled. So I think my best answer is come back to me in 5 years. We'll see where it is.
All right,
If
we'll
it's
make
still
an
really here.
appointment in May of 2028. We'll talk about it, Alicia. But I do want to pull on something you just mentioned there, and the fact that art is a long game. You've got to be in it for an extended period of time to see success. But that's a bit, as you two may know, antithetical to the world we live in. People want to create things. So if someone's listening to this, maybe they're not an artist, but maybe they're a content creator. Sometimes people, they'll say, hey, I posted something on Instagram and got 2 likes, and now I don't feel like doing this thing anymore. Or I did a podcast and 3 people listened. I'm not interested in it anymore. How do people in the art world, Alicia, work on with that sort of deterrent of this world that we live in today, where we need instant satisfaction? Are artists wired differently? Because I speak to a lot of content creators who have millions and millions of followers, and they'll talk about, I had one who said, it took me 8 years to crack 1 million. Now they've got like 6 million followers. But when you say it took me 8 years to get 1 million followers to someone, they'll be like, I'm out. So, Alicia, are artists, or I should say, are successful artists wired differently than most because they understand this long game process?
Ooh, I like this question. I think you have to be. You really do have to be. But I think the where it comes in this wired differently is that we just have this innate need to create. And
Mm.
so it isn't about making the sales. It isn't about getting the gala relationships. It isn't about having your work in museums. They just want to create. And it may sound cliche, but we really do have that within us. And you'll find often that the ones who achieve that success, yes, probably after 10 years, 15 years, or even recently, actually, there have been some groundbreaking shows at museums of women artists in like their 80s and their 90s, unfortunately, because they just weren't able to get that recognition early on, but also because this is really when they're hitting their stride. You do need to think about that. There's just it's really interesting that we do have this gap, but luckily now it's a great time to, like I said, just be in the art world and use your own platforms to be able to promote your work and to push through the need to have that instantaneous success, because you will achieve it, but you do need to put in the effort. And we're both a testament to that. This was not overnight success that we achieved in our businesses. It also took us 5 years, 10 years, and that's our story, really.
But the funny thing is, Alicia, to people who are just probably experiencing you once they pick up the book, we're like, oh, who are these 2 new artists? You know, it's I all the time I use the example of Pedro Pascal, who's everyone's zaddy at the moment from The Last of Us and The Mandalorian. But you know what? He's been an actor on crappy TV shows for nearly 20 years. He was grinding it out, and finally he's achieved this. But to people, he's like, where'd this handsome guy come from? This is a new actor over here. And people don't really realize that. And people are going to see that with you. And for Kat, I want to ask you this about when you get asked, because when folks come to me and say, hey, I want to do a podcast, how do I grow my audience? And my answer always is do 1,000 podcasts and then check back with me about an audience. What do you say to folks who are like, I want to be an artist. How do I become successful? What are the shortcuts? What's the magic bullet? Because I know there isn't one, Kat, but I'm curious what your answer is when people ask for it.
Yeah, this is a really awesome question. And I also want to say what Alicia just shared and talked about is I agree. And I think that there is a space of deciding that you're in it for the long game and deciding that you're willing to do the work for 10 years, 20 years, 80 years, 50 years. But if you start taking action now, you are going to get results. You're not going to not see progress. And one of the things that I talked about in our first book actually was treating each opportunity, even if it's a local coffee shop show or a small gallery or even an online feature, as if it's like that big overnight success that you're looking for. And just like really hyping yourself up, sharing it, telling everyone, like, hey, look, I'm featured here. And really just celebrating every tiny step, because it's going to build momentum over time. And the people who are there with you from the beginning are going to be so proud when they see you getting those bigger features, bigger opportunities. And I actually had a collector who I met in college who still tries, she pays off my paintings like little bits at a time, but she started collecting my work when it was like $50. And I recently had a show in Paris. So my biggest advice is start taking action now. Don't wait for someone to come knocking on your door. Start showing up, do the work, do the 30 minutes a day or even 15 minutes a day, and celebrate and really appreciate every tiny feature, because honestly, that's exactly how you're going to move forward. You never know who's going to be at your local coffee shop. You never know who you're going to meet at that networking event at your local museum. Just really, really squeeze all the juice and be super, super grateful, and just see that whole picture of you when you're 90, and recognizing that if you're willing to do it this whole time, you're going to make it. Like there's no way, because half the people will fall off and give up. As sad as that is, I don't want them to, but it's true. We've seen it a lot.
Oh yeah, I think that's the unfortunate thing is we have this huge community, and unfortunately because of that gap between the success and when you start, we see a lot of people drop off, and it breaks our hearts. But this is exactly why we do what we do, because we want to show people that yes, it does take the time, it does take the effort, but even like Kat said, those little increments every day are progress. And one of my favorite things in relation to that was I saw a graphic recently, and it was, if you look at it, it's just like circles, and so that's what you feel like. But if you rotate it on its side, it's actually circles moving upward. So you feel like you're going in circles, but if you just shift the perspective, you actually see that you are making progress. So it's hard to describe it with words rather than seeing it visually, but it's such a good metaphor for what this journey, what the creative journey actually feels like.
Cool. Well, let's shift from metaphors to the real deal and the Creative Business Handbook. Kat, who's this book for?
This book is for someone who's willing to build a community, who's willing to dive into the world of business. It's kind of a step further than just creating an art practice. There's nothing wrong with that. And if someone just wants to have their art, that's awesome. But I think this book is for someone who really wants to lead and to build a career for themselves, whether it's a side hustle or, full-blown business. And we were really inspired by our own journeys, building the online gallery, the magazine, and my coaching business recently. Just we broke down all our steps, and we really want people to have a blueprint, because we kind of had to scrape everything together, Google our way through, and get pieces of information. So even though it's just the blueprint, I think is going to help people have that clarity and some kind of reference, which we did not have at the time.
And Alicia, Kat just mentioned, you two didn't have the Creative Business Handbook when you were starting your businesses and working your way up. How did you learn? I know Kat mentioned Google, but was it a lot of trial by fire? Was it just doing it, like as people say, throwing the shit against the wall? Pardon my French, but how did you find the sort of tangible ways that worked for you two that made it into the Creative Business Handbook?
Yes, so I like to think we're one step ahead of throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks, but there was definitely a lot of trial and error, and I love the phrase trial by fire because that absolutely happened as well. I think both of us are just natural learners. We are naturally curious, so we love to experiment a lot. And yes, some things didn't work out, but for every, let's say, 50 that didn't work out, one did, and so we would continue on that path. Another thing is we love to read, so it's not a surprise that we ended up writing a book because we love consuming books. We are both voracious readers. I think Kat is even more so than I am, but we both love to read in the self-development categories and business and art. So from all of that, we culled all of the bits and nuggets of wisdom that were important to what we were doing. We follow a lot of experts online, so we listen to podcasts, we follow people on Instagram, on other social media channels, LinkedIn, and reading online articles, blogs. So, I mean, anything we could get our hands on, and if necessary, purchased, programs, or worked with coaches, worked with mentors. So really kind of anything we could get our hands on that wasn't a traditional business degree.
That's awesome. And I should mention, if you're looking for a book, there's one called Good Listen by this fine author, Joe Pardavila. You may want to check it out. It's available in, where you buy books. And Alicia, I want to mention too, you said the word curiosity. And I write about and talk about this all the time, that it's one of these skills that for some reason has been sucked out of adulthood. Like, we're afraid to ask questions. We're afraid to investigate. We're afraid to see what people outside of our own tribes are thinking and doing. What happened to curiosity, Alicia? Why do you think we stopped being curious? Do you have any explanation for it? Because I could never figure it out. My explanation was, as kids growing up, our parents would say, shut up and stop asking questions. So that has something to do with it. But why do you think people lack curiosity?
Well, Joe, I think you answered it actually in your question. You said fear.
Yeah.
So it's based in fear. It's rooted in us not wanting to fail, in us being afraid of what other people will think, in us worrying about just achieving success in general. Will it happen for us? And so we're so afraid of all of these things happening that we don't even try, that we don't even have the faith or the courage to just make an attempt, to put yourself out there, to reach out, to start a business, to write a book, to do all the things that we're doing now. And I still don't know how I cultivated this in myself. I'm naturally quiet. I'm naturally an introvert. And yet somehow I was able to push forward and try, and just try, knowing that things might fail, that things might not work out, that people might look at me funny. And honestly, they still do. Actually, funny story. So I was just finishing my taxes recently, and my accountant said, your job description of podcast host, author, writer, gallery owner doesn't fit in the tax form. So I just had to say the all-encompassing term, arts professional. So even today, I don't fit in a box. What I do, no one can really understand. But I love that, and it works for me. And I could never have this life that I have now if it wasn't for that initial curiosity of, can I make this happen because I love it?
Oh, that's great. But in that box that you've created, Kat's in that box. So, Kat, talk to me how you and Alicia have been able to. It seems like you're very like-minded. Not to say that you're duplicate copies of each other, but I think you guys have the same vibe. How was the process of the two of you writing this book in tandem? Having a co-author with you. I know you've done it before, but what was it like working out these ideas, putting them onto paper, hand in hand with Alicia?
Yeah. Well, we make great writing partners, I will have to say. I'm very grateful. We complement each other well. We each have a different strength, and I think we each brought something to the table from our experiences. So I still practice my art, I exhibit my art, and Alicia really had a lot more experience in the professional realm with galleries and auction houses. So she really translated all of that knowledge into her business. So we each had something really different to say, and working together, I would say I could not find a better writing partner. We're going to write 20 more books together. But from the outline to just dividing the chapters, we kind of tackled it over time, and it was a pretty smooth process. I will have to say there were no no major challenges other than just having a short time frame to get it done, and really carving out that extra hour in the morning and doing it sometimes while traveling. But it's worth it, really thinking of ourselves back 10 years ago, wishing we had this resource. That's really what keeps us going.
And Alicia, one of the parts of your book, you write about growing and scaling your business. And I feel like as I've been working in business journalism for the last 3 years, the coming up with the idea, building a team, going to market, that seems easy in comparison to scaling. Because I think once people find that thing, they find their community, they sell it, but then they're like, okay, how do we make this bigger? How do we grow the team? Why is scaling one of the toughest? I mean, entrepreneurship's tough. I don't mean to diminish all the other stuff, but why is scaling seem to be the one thing that a lot of entrepreneurs, leaders have getting over that hump?
I'll speak to it with regards to creative business, obviously, because this is our strength and this is what our book is about. I think a lot of creatives are solopreneurs. And so it's simply a matter of, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough resources. And so they get stuck. So one thing that we definitely talk about is, how do you help? How do you hire on help? How do you hire on the right team? How do you find people that can support you in the right way? Or another big thing is, how do you make what you're already doing more efficient? How can you automate? What can you make simpler? And what can you streamline so that you can free up that time to then continue to do the other things that will make your business grow? So I think those are two very simple answers, but they get straight to the point.
As my business was growing, and I will say I'm still scaling. I can't say like I've scaled. I think this is going to be a process over the next 10 years, but I will say that one of the biggest fears that comes up is, oh no, now I am responsible for other people. Whether you have freelancers or contractors, you do have a certain expectation, and that fear of failure, letting people down or letting people go, that was one of the biggest challenges. And sometimes it's making those decisions to hire or get help before you even are financially ready to then help you earn more and give yourself more space for ideas and content generation and creating products. So I think it's the chicken before the egg situation as you grow your business and you're not actually ever ready for it.
And it's funny too, because there's a lot about your book is, obviously selling your creativity. And me personally, I have this irrational relationship with money. Like, I never want to deal with money. I've always been fortunate enough where like I'll work for a company that provides services, but I don't even know how much anything costs. I don't care. I like working in the sandbox. That's always been my whole life. And I wonder, do artists / creative entrepreneurs struggle with this as well? Because part of that is knowing your worth. Like, what, I mean, that's always the fine. I've always found fascinating about artists. Like, one piece of art is $1 million and another piece of art on Etsy is like $10. So Alicia, how do artists, creatives, maybe this is something that you've had to deal with. How do you know worth? How do you know value? Because it's not like there's comps. Like, in art is art. You can't, I mean, I guess you can compare some art to others, but it's hard. It's, one car compared to another car. It's basically the same kind of car, different engine, blah, blah, blah. How do you find value or know value in art?
Oof. So this is the question that we get asked most often from artists. So in 10 plus years of being a gallerist curator, that is the question that I receive most often in DMs, in emails, all of the things. So my answer, it changes, but it generally gets down to what kind of artist do you want to be? That is the first thing that I will say back. So I turn it around to them. Do you want to be the type of artist that's showing at these white box galleries, that's having their work acquired by museums, that's showing at major art fairs? If that's the case, then you're probably going to want to slowly increase your prices over time, do this incrementally, and sell at a higher price point, because that's kind of what's expected for that level. On the flip side, maybe you want to be on your own path. You want to be your own gallerist. You just want to sell, make a living, do things that you love, support your family. And in that case, you can afford to sell at a lower price point, but sell in higher volume. In that case, again, you probably don't need the gallery as much. You can sell on your own Instagram, on your Etsy, have a shop on your own website. And in that way, you're still going to be an artist. You're still going to be that practicing studio artist that you want to be. You might not have as many opportunities in the other direction, like I said, with the galleries, museums, etc. But you won't care about that because you want to just be making the work. And I'm putting out these two paths, but really it's a spectrum. Those are just really two examples. But you're right. There is no black and white when it comes to art pricing or pricing in creativity and creative fields in general. It's a lot of experimenting, figuring out, and we both had to do that with all the things that we offer, all the services and all the different types of creative products and things that we offer. But it's a lot of experimenting. We'll be fully upfront with that. There are formulas, but you often even still have to work within them. So it's trial and error, and it will take time, but eventually you will come up with pricing that works. And another thing that you mentioned, though, was like, do artists have this struggle? Yes, of course they do. And it goes back to worth, and it goes back to a lot of imposter syndrome that you see that's tied back to all of this, in art school, like, they don't have the business knowledge. They're not taught from the very beginning. And so they don't understand that they are worth it and that what they create has value, and they underprice themselves a lot. And we see this. So much of our education is based around just getting over the mental hurdles of being an artist, that you don't have to starve. You can make money. Making money is okay and normal. And you should seek to do that if you want to have a sustainable career as an artist. So I'm glad that we're talking about this because it is a huge topic. And like I said, something that artists ask us constantly for good reason.
And Kat, I'm sure another question is, how do I go viral? In your book, you talk about building buzz. And for example, a friend of mine who's a journalist, he interviewed Jennifer Aniston and Adam Sandler like 10 years ago on a red carpet, and something goofy happened. Like, he's a really tall Australian fella, and he was kneeling down, and then they said, "Why are you kneeling down?" He goes, "Oh, because I was blocking the photographers." And he gets up and he's so tall, he freaks out Adam Sandler and Jennifer Aniston. So it's this big viral moment. Except it happened 10 years ago. Someone discovered it, put it on TikTok, and it's had over 10 million views recently. So, and I wrote a whole thing about how, like, there's no way to predict what goes viral. So, Kat, I'm sure you get this question. How do I create buzz? How do I go viral?
This is really interesting. So there is no secret to going viral. You do kind of have to throw a lot of content out there in order to, even have a chance. But one thing that I did notice from observation is that going viral has two parts to it. Half of the people will love the thing and half of the people will hate it. And that will create a really kind of interesting dynamic where people will become in conversation with each other and they'll share it for their own reasons. What they hate this, like, look at this terrible, horrible thing, or this is amazing. I love this. It's so inspiring. And we notice that with a magazine, whether it's an artist that we share that's a little controversial or a quote that we share that people just love to hate. And for my own art, one of my paintings went viral a few years ago, and it was something I made in 10 minutes. I was just in the habit of posting content every day. I was sharing my studio practice, my daily paintings, my sketches, and one of those small paintings just happened to go viral. It was featured by models, by galleries, by museums even. It was crazy. I had no way of predicting that. So I know that a lot of creators, artists, musicians will share. You just have to keep sharing your stuff. And some of it's not going to go anywhere. Some of it's going to resonate with a few people, and some of it will just randomly take off. So as always, the trick is just to keep showing up.
Mhm. And lastly, Alicia, in the book, you talk about cultivating a CEO mindset. And this sort of ties a bow around our initial conversation about creatives becoming, entrepreneurs and making money. The CEO mindset, what is that for a creative person? Because you always hear the description of the visionary CEO, and then you have the number crunching CEO. But sometimes when you're, as we've been talking about, a solo entrepreneur, you got to be both. You can't just be the visionary entrepreneur and let everything else happen what happens. You've got to be able to do the business side of things. So how do creatives cultivate that CEO mindset?
Great question. I love that we talk about this in our book. It's always been really important for us to, yes, talk about brass tacks, things like how do you get your website together? How do you build buzz? How do you do the marketing? How do you scale? But we also love, love, love to talk about the emotional aspect because it is incredibly hard. You've mentioned this. We've talked about this. It is not always an easy road. In fact, I heard an entrepreneur say one time, if you haven't cried about your business, if you haven't had a bad day yet, it's still cute. It's not a real business yet. So with that said, there are obviously things that you can do to start to envision yourself as CEO. And I think one of the biggest thing is simply to step up because as you mentioned, you are probably one of those two things at the beginning. You're either like the practical person or you're the visionary person. So I think just realizing which one you are and then working towards filling in those gaps that you might have towards the other one. And really there is a wider array of things that you need. It's not just the number crunching and the ideas. There's a lot of things in between there. So again, just finding those gaps that you might have within yourself and working to fill them. This is something that both of us have had to do. I think we know our strengths, and that's because we're able to be self-reflective and just really hone in on what we still need to do in order to grow as CEOs. But I think this is also something that Kat can really speak to. So I'd like to hear her response on this as well.
I think for me, it was honestly as simple as making a decision because I was waiting for something for a really long time. I was waiting for some approval or some award or something to happen to make me feel like I was the CEO. And honestly, it all just came down to it was a pain point for me. It was frustrating. I felt out of control. Things weren't working. And instead of just falling victim to those failures, I had to decide, like, no, I'm going to make this successful. I'm going to learn what I need to learn. I'm going to become a better salesperson. I'll get better with numbers. All the things I was lacking, I had to really own up to it and decide I'm going to figure this out. Even if it means hiring someone or getting a coach or, working with my accountant more intimately, I had to take full ownership of it in order to start seeing that result. And unfortunately, being the CEO is you have to take the responsibility for the good and the bad. So there's no one to blame when things aren't working other than yourself. And just learning to be more neutral about it, knowing that things are bad or you didn't fail, but just using everything as feedback to help you evolve and shift into something better.
Awesome. The book is called The Creative Business Handbook, Ekaterina Popova and Alicia Puig. It's been a great conversation, you two. I wish you the best of luck with this book. I think it's one of those things where, like you two, you needed a roadmap, except you guys made it yourself. For folks who don't want to do that and want to read it, it's a great example of what steps you can take to do so. So I wish you the best of luck. Alicia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much again for having us. It was a pleasure.
And Kat, good luck with everything. Good luck with the book launch. And can't wait to see the next piece of art that goes viral for you, Kat.
Thank you so much. Me too. I can't wait. Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. And that'll do it for this episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you are enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe to automatically receive new episodes when they're dropped. And if you have a moment, a review would be greatly appreciated. It would help more amazing entrepreneurs like you find the show. Let's connect on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.